Hello again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are back to take a closer look at the recently released Aerosoft DHC-6 Twin Otter. The product released just a couple of days ago. Obviously we took a fairly detailed look at the aircraft with a preview video during early access, but with the Twin Otter now complete we're going to carry out a more thorough analysis of the aircraft with a full review. As the aircraft's been out for a couple of days now, we're going to first carry out our flight, as usual a full startup, the full sector and then the shutdown at destination. That way if you've already picked up the aircraft yourselves or perhaps are already quite familiar with it, you can join along for the flight should you wish to do so. After our flight we'll then take a bit of a closer look at the aircraft in terms of its texturing, its modelling. We'll carry out a couple more tests as well. And then as ever we'll finish up the review with my overall analysis on the aircraft. As always guys, I do hope you enjoy the video and find it to be of use. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Today's flight is going to be a spot of island hopping in the Solomon Islands. We'll be taking the aircraft from Honiara International Airport, where we're currently on the ground, and we'll be tracking out towards the west, bound for Nusatupe Airport. As ever, I apologise if I get the pronunciations wrong. In terms of the weather, it's a pretty variable day here in the Solomon Islands, quite a few showers passing through the area, so there might be a bit of weather dodging en route. Anyway, I'm quite looking forward to another flight in the Aerosoft Twin Otter, so let's head for the cockpit and we'll get the aircraft started up. So welcome once again to the cockpit of the Aerosoft DHC-6 Twin Otter. This time we're on the ground in the Solomon Islands. We're going to be taking a few passengers on a bit of island hopping up towards Nusatupe Airport. They're all on board, so we'll run through our pre-start checks. The control locks are off, parking brake is set, fire handles are both in, emergency fuel switches are both set to normal, emergency boost pumps are both off. Fuel selector is set to normal, boost pumps are off, static source is set to normal, vent fan is off, inverter switch is set to number 1, that's still not currently modelled on the aircraft. De-icing switches are off, cabin lighting and signs, we'll get the no smoking and the fasten seatbelt signs on. Anti-collision light can come on in preparation for the start. Bleed air switches are both off, pitot heat is off, generator switches are both off, bus tie switch is set to normal, the flap handle is up, fuel levers are both off, prop levers are both set to feather, and the power levers are both set to flight idle. Come over to the right of the overhead, the windshield wipers are off, windshield heat is off, and back over to the left, landing lights are set off, and the ignition switch is set to normal, and that's caged. Looks like we've got a little bit of rain passing through the area here at the moment, so we'll have to dodge that potentially on the departure. Anyway, the DC master switch can go on. External battery switch will go to battery for the start. And you can hear the aircraft powering up there. As I mentioned during the preview, the sounds on the aircraft are excellent. Aerosoft seem to have continued to work on those up towards the release candidate, so the aircraft sounds now even nicer than they were before. Anyway, the bus voltage is checked. We're looking for above 18 volts. We're well above 20 there. Caution lights are checked. Fire detection test will run. Fuel quantity is checked, and I'll get this right this time. We've got about 800 pounds on board in each of the main tanks there. Fuel quantity indicators. We'll just run a test. So the needle's winding all the way down to 0. And we have a good test there. And they should come back up to the 800 pound position. So fuel quantities are checked. As with the preview of the aircraft, there's a couple of other check procedures that we can carry out, namely the cross-feed check and the emergency pump check. We're not going to carry those out just now. We'll wait till we've finished up our flight. Again, they're quite long, quite complex procedures. We'll have a look in a little bit more depth at those later on in the video. So we are now ready for the engine start. The fuel levers, again just checking both of those are off. Prop levers are set to feather. Power levers are set to idle. Boost pumps can come on. Again you can hear the sounds, really top notch. And the start switch, we'll start the right engine first, so the start switch can go to right. The engine's spooling up, we're just waiting until we're through 12% there on the NG. And there's our 12%, so the fuel lever can go on. And we'll just continue to monitor the engine as it spools up. And once the engine's stable, we'll put the prop lever into the fully forward position.
Roger, 6351, turn left heading 240.
Heading 240, Roger, 6351.
Looks like we have a good start there on the right. We'll put the right prop into the fully forward position. Now we'll just wait for the prop RPM to come up there. And looks like we have a good start on the right engine. As we did during the preview, we'll head outside for the left engine start, just so you can hear the startup sounds in a bit more detail. And I'll come back to you again once we have 2 good engine starts. Okay, so we do have 2 good starts. We have both of the engine-driven generators selected on. I'm going to check the generator loads, making sure we're below 0.5 amps. And we're good there on both sides. Compass and gyros. Compass showing a heading there of about 110. And we have the same on the HSR on the left and on the right. Altimeters are set. We have QNH 1005, and again the same on the right, and the altimeter's reading correctly. Caution lights, we just have the pneumatic low pressure caution there. As we saw during the preview video, that should extinguish once we come up on the engine power. Radio is an autopilot. We've already set up the nav1 radio with the Hotel November VOR, which is a frequency of 113.6, and we visually identified that. As far as the autopilot goes, we'll climb up to 8,000 feet initially. That should hopefully get us above the worst of the cloud. Obviously with the DHC-6 being a non-pressurised aircraft, we don't really want to go above 10,000.
Voice 6251, Kinabalu radar, good morning sir. Identified, continue heading, climb flight level 140.
So we have 8,000 set. We'll be tracking outbound on the 284 radial, so we'll set that on the HSI.
Sorry sir, yeah, let's get 6351, continue heading, climb flight level 140.
And we'll be departing off runway 06, so we'll set that on the heading bug. So radios and autopilot are set, signs are on. Can't quite make out the windsock from our present position, but the wind is favouring runway 06, so we'll taxi out. The holding point just off to our 1 o'clock there. Park brake can come off. We'll make our way over to the holding point. We'll carry out just a few of the run-up checks. Again, we won't go through everything now, just for the sake of brevity in the video. The aircraft needing a fair bit of power here to get onto the roll.
Clear climb, heading 14, correction, heading 022 and 140 for 6351.
Right.
Now we'll just check our flight instruments there as we make the turn. Now we'll just make a gentle turn back to the left again just to check the instruments. So onto the brakes, we'll hold short of the runway. Park brake can go on. As I say, we'll just carry out a couple of the checks before we run the before takeoff checklist. So we'll carry out the prop feather check. The prop levers can go back to fully coarse initially. And we'll put the props into the feather position.
Bye-bye.
Can my hotel mic about the ground?
Repeat ATC there?
I'll tell him my mic has been like.
Stand by.
So according to the checklist, we should see the MP at approximately 23%. It does seem though as though the props come back further there. We're actually showing around 8%. And we do have the prop reset light illuminated there. So the props can come back to fully forward.
Left, heading 290, request 51.
And we'll carry out the beta range check as well, so just moving the power levers into the beta range. You can hear the change in sound is rather abrupt there, that could perhaps use a little bit of work. The props are into the beta range, we do have the beta range both on the left and the right lights illuminated. So once again bringing the power levers back to idle. As I say, we'll skip the rest of the checks for now, we'll just continue down to the before takeoff checklist. So trim tabs, are set. Again, we're going to leave the rudder in the neutral position as we did during the preview video. Flaps are set 10 degrees, and just waiting for them to roll out to the 10 degree position. There's 10 degrees, the flaps are set. Flight instruments are checked, radios are set. Prop levers are fully forward, auto feather can come on. And we do have the select light there illuminated. Engine instruments are checked. Bleed air both on the left and the right. Again, I'm not entirely sure for the procedure, but we've got plenty of runway here, plenty of performance in the aircraft, so we'll get the bleed airs on now. And de-ice is not required. So for the lineup checks, we'll carry those out in our present position. Flight controls. Again, a little bit tricky to see the flight controls from the Twin Otter. So we have full left, full right, and neutral. Full up, full down, and neutral, and checking the rudder. Full left, full right, and neutral. Transponder can go to out. Landing lights can come on, as can the strobe lights. Caution lights, again just the pneumatic low pressure, and runway heading we'll check once we're lined up. So part brake off. You can see the windsock more clearly now. Again, slightly favouring runway 06. It's mostly a crosswind component though. It's all clear on final, and all clear upwind.
60 holding point Alpha, and 86 clearance here to leave control zone boundary on route to Malikai, 2,500 feet, Fox 0541.
So we are all set, the runway heading is checked. We'll make a left turn out on departure just to avoid the most significant high terrain. Coming up on the power levers. The checklist calls for full power during the takeoff, but we're going to go for ever so slightly below that. In Twin Otter terms, we've got a ton of runway available, so we don't really need full power for the takeoff. Power is set. VR is going to be 64 knots, we're just through that now, so coming back on the yoke. And we're airborne. The aircraft does perhaps feel a little bit light during the takeoff, a little bit vague in terms of ground interaction, but overall the rudder response is reasonable, the aircraft's certainly very easy to fly. Anyway, pitching for 100 knots in the climb. And we'll just wait until we're up through 400 feet and then we'll come back to climb power, carry out our after takeoff checklist. So it's 500 feet, we're looking for 45 psi on the torque and bring the props all the way back to 75%. Just letting the nose come down there again to maintain our 100 knot climb speed. And coming up through 1,000 feet, we'll start our turn out towards the west. So 75% on the props. The after takeoff checklist, the flaps can come up. And the flaps are up. Auto feather can come off. Climb power is set. Your damper can come on. Signs we'll leave on for now. And the landing lights can come off. And that's the after takeoff checklist complete. So we're just continuing around onto our westerly heading. We'll come due west initially just to pick up the radial outbound from Hotel November. So good there now on the heading, we'll set the heading bug.
Mustang 3045, good morning, climbing passing 1,300 feet, heading 022.
And we've got Honiara Airfield just off the left wing. Can't see too much of the high terrain there with the cloud coverage. And coming up through 2,500 feet. Showing 2.5 miles from the station at the moment. We'll just come out on the range there on the GNS 530. As I say, we'll just maintain due west until we pick up the radial.
8,000 feet, passing 2,000 feet, left heading 260, Mustang 3045.
So as I mentioned during the takeoff run, the aircraft overall felt pretty reasonable there, but there wasn't too much feedback in terms of the feeling of the aircraft, which is a little bit strange. I seem to recall that was different during the preview video that I ran, but presumably wrong on that one. But overall the rudder response was reasonable, the aircraft was easy enough to control. It is a very pleasant aircraft to hand fly. As we discussed during the preview, it's very stable.
012, climb flight level 170, contact radar 126.1.
Just coming out slightly right on our heading here just to make our way through this gap in the clouds. We'll get the pitot heat on.
Climb flight level 170, radar 191, 163, 126.1, 160.12.
And as long as we keep ourselves out of the clouds here, we shouldn't need any of our de-icing systems, so we'll leave those off for now. Already up through 4,000 feet, so I'm not sure that 8,000 feet is really going to cut it for us, but we'll see how we go. We might either come up to 10,000 or we'll just have to weave our way through the clouds as we make our way westbound. So we've got 45 psi set on the torque, as I said, 75% on the RPM. We're doing 100 knots here in the climb. That's giving us a climb rate of about 1,000 feet, which I think is pretty reasonable for the Twin Otter. Engine temperatures and pressures all looking good.
Several copy stand by.
It does look like there's a nice substantial gap in the clouds for us there, so we should be able to maintain visual here in the climb. Always good fun flying in this part of the world. You do get some pretty unpredictable weather. Certainly adds to the challenge. And looking at the GNS there, we're slowly coming back onto our planned course. We'll just keep a good eye on that CDI bar. So once again, it's obviously not a study level aircraft, we discussed that during the preview, but for what it is, I think it's actually done nicely. And especially given the price, I think the aircraft is good fun. It fits very nicely into Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's such a versatile aircraft, you can do really almost anything with it. It's obviously STOL capable, you can do some island hopping as we are today. It's very capable in rugged tundra as well. All sorts of operations really. The Twin Otter is a little bit of a do-it-all aircraft, and for that reason I think it's a great option for the sim. Once we're clear of this bank of clouds, it looks as though the weather's easing up a little bit, so we'll just wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get the seatbelt signs off. So we are just coming up on 8,000 feet. It does look like the weather's clearing up quite nicely actually, so we're going to level the aircraft off here. Obviously the higher we go, the less oxygen our poor passengers are going to be getting, so we might as well try and stay down on 8,000 if we can.
Aircraft number 220, direct to Bravo Romeo uniform.
220, thanks to Romeo uniform.
So 8,000 set, we'll just get the aircraft trimmed off the straight and level at 8,000. The aircraft's actually quite difficult to describe in terms of how it flies. It's almost a little bit fly-by-wire in terms of how it feels. Certainly once you get it into a turn, it will pretty much maintain the angle of bank all day long. And in pitch here it's reasonably light on the controls, you really just need a bit of pressure on the yoke to get it levelled out. So once again, the Twin Otter is a pretty easy aircraft to fly. I'm not entirely sure how accurate the flight model is, but it's very pleasant overall. So there's 8,000. Cruise power setting is 40 psi on the torque, so we'll come back to that. And there's 40 psi. Fairly small throttle movements there, resulting in, I wouldn't say an abrupt change in engine power, but a somewhat significant change. And the CDI bar there seemed to go straight through the centre. To be fair, we're not that far out from the station, but I would have expected to see that drift across ever so slightly more. I would suspect that's a sim issue rather than an aircraft issue. So the aircraft's nicely trimmed, we'll just get our heading bug aligned and then we'll get the autopilot in. Autopilot can go on, we'll come into heading and out. And the autopilot now doing its job, flying the aircraft for us. It did a pretty decent job during the preview, I suspect it'll be much the same for our flight today. One slight shame with the Twin Otter, I would say, is we do have both the native autopilot, we also have the default Asobo autopilot unit there. Both function absolutely fine, but it would have been nice perhaps just to have the native autopilot, just to keep the character of the Twin Otter. We'll just come slightly left on our heading again, just to avoid this bank of cloud off the nose. And I think now we can quite comfortably let the passengers up for a little bit. So the fasten seatbelt signs can come off. Anyway, we are nicely established now here in the cruise. As I often like to do, we'll head outside the aircraft. Looks like we've got about 1 hour 14 minutes to run towards destination at the moment, so quite a bit of time to kill here. We'll take in the scenery as we go. There's not an awful lot. We'll be over the water for much of the flight, but we do have a few islands that we'll be crossing en route. And as usual, I'll come back to you again once we're ready to make our descent in towards Nusatupe Airport. So welcome back to the cockpit. I hope you enjoyed the scenery en route. We've got about 9 minutes here to destination. You can just see the island off the nose, off in the distance. So we'll take the aircraft out of altitude hold, descend down to 2,000 feet initially. And we'll go for around 700 feet per minute on the descent rate. Try and keep the vertical speed there fairly comfortable for the passengers. As we start our descent, the signs can come on. And you can see getting fairly late now here in the afternoon in the Solomon Islands. Again, destination just off the nose on the horizon more or less. We've got the CDI bar now tracking off the GPS. The autopilot did a fine job getting us here en route. To be expected, again it's the default Asobo autopilot. So it has all of the same behaviours, it works just as well, and in some cases just as poorly. We'll leave the power on for now, let the speed build up a little bit here in the descent. Looking at the GNS unit, we've got a more or less northwest-southeast runway. We'll overfly the field, we'll see what the windsock's doing. If we can't spot a windsock, then we'll land facing out towards the northwest, just going off the wind that we saw earlier on today. That speed building up to around 150 knots now, just above. And en route we've burned through about a little bit over £300 on each side there, so about £600 fuel in total. At least from our fuel figure at top of climb. Another really beautiful part of the world to be flying in, some quite nice islands en route. The scenery there is a little bit basic, some of the photo imagery's not as good as it could be. Anyway, we'll start running through our descent checks. So the fuel quantities are checked. We've got a little bit over £400 in each main tank there. So a little bit over an extra hour's worth of fuel. Fuel selector is set to normal. Hydraulic pressure is checked. Caution lights are checked. De-ice not required, and the altimeters are set. QNH 1006. That's the descent checklist complete. As far as the approach checks go, the signs are already on. We'll just double check those. And we can get the landing lights on a little bit early here. And that's our approach checklist complete. So we're still here in the descent. You can see that the airfield just off at our 2 o'clock now. We'll disengage the autopilot. We'll fly the rest of the approach manually. And again, we'll just overfly the field. We'll see what the wind's doing before we actually make the approach itself. Aircraft just feeling ever so slightly out of trim there with the autopilot out, so just correcting that. Now we'll just reduce our power, the torque there coming up in the descent. So again, if we can't tell what the wind's doing, we'll land out to the northwest on our current heading. It's one to go. We'll just line up the CDI bar. We'll have to come back into V-lock.
Deviation 10 miles, track 6.
Recognize the 35110 miles, prior track cruise.
351.
And just lining up the HSI bar there with the runway. Just help maintain our situational awareness as we come to fly the approach itself. Again, some beautiful islands, some quite nice water masking as well in the sim.
Circular 5192 heading 070 approve.
070 approach, second 5102.
And we'll keep a good eye out for that windsock. I think it's going to be pretty tricky to spot if there is one.
Our turn on QNH 1010.
That's QNH 1010, so we can 6.
You can just spot it off at the northern end of the field there. It does look like the wind's down runway 32. So we'll come back round the corner, head in for a left-hand downwind. That's 2,000 feet, but we'll continue the descent down to 1,000 to enter into the pattern. Once again, the Twin Otter, a very easy aircraft to hand fly. requiring fairly minimal control input here from me. So just coming onto our downwind, we'll go wings level. And to run through our downwind checks. Brakes are checked and off, undercarriage is down. Mixtures are rich, fuel pumps are on, fuel quantities are checked. Instruments are checked. Landing lights are on, harnesses are secure. Now we'll just track outbound on our downwind a little bit further here. We can start configuring as well for the landing, so we'll come back off the power, we'll start slowing up so we can take the flaps. Your damper can come off. And again we have the pneumatic low pressure caution there. You can disregard that for now. So starting our turn back round towards final. Speed's coming back nicely.
Mike approaching 5 hot. Hot 5 Mike, contact radar 119. Cover to 119. Good day, sir.
And looking good. It's all clear on final. Start taking some flap. We'll come down final approach at 90 knots. We're looking for 75 knots as VREF.
Lima Mike, maintain 1000 feet and track direct to destination and QNX 1012. Maintain 1000 feet, try direct to destination 1010 Lima Mike.
So continuing to configure the aircraft. Just coming down towards flaps 30. Now we'll take the final stage of flap. Those last two stages of flap giving quite a bit of drag there, really having to come up on the power. We'll maintain around 80 knots now. And the prop levers can go fully forward. So pitch is full fine, undercarriage is down, flaps are set, landing clearance not required, the runway is clear. Just come up through 500. And we've got quite a bit of runway here. The parking area is down the other end of the runway, so we'll probably just use the brakes to slow down. We shouldn't need the beach range on the props. Speed's looking good. We'll continue. Obviously visual. Feels as though there's a slight crosswind out from the right currently. Just going to keep the power on a little bit longer here. We don't want to land short in this particular case. There's touchdown. Probably could have flared just a little bit more there on touchdown. Anyway, we'll let the aircraft roll momentarily, and now coming onto the brakes, getting ourselves slowed down towards the parking area. So it looks like the wind was actually straight down the runway. The aircraft felt like it wanted to drift out to the left a little bit there. Looks like our ground marshals can't quite make up their minds, but we'll head in towards the parking area. We'll figure things out if the marshaller continues to keep switching around there. And we'll just wait until we got parked up before we carry out our aft landing checks. So onto the brakes, park brake can go on, the aft landing checks, the flaps can come up, bleed air can go off, DI systems are off, pitot heat can come off, landing lights are off, strobe lights are off, transponder is off, and the trim tabs. So rudder trim is set and the elevator trim is set. For the shutdown checks, the park brake is on, radios are set, power levers are back at idle, prop levers can come back to feather. Generators can come off, and the fuel levers can go off. So we'll shut down the left engine first. And we have a good shutdown there on the left, and we'll do the same on the right. So 2 good rundowns, the boost pumps can come off, anti-collision light can come off. We'll leave our DC systems on, we're going to offload our passengers, and then we'll be getting the aircraft turned around and heading back home towards Honiara. For those of you who just wanted to join along for the flight, thank you very much for watching. And for the rest of you, as I say, we're now going to carry on with the review. And we'll take a bit more of a detailed look at the aircraft, starting with the external texturing and modelling. So, starting with the external modelling and texturing of the Twin Otter. Hopefully you'll have already got a good feeling for it during the flight, but we'll take a slightly more detailed look. I would say that the Aerosoft Twin Otter is very much on a par with their CRJ in terms of the modelling detail. That is to say that on a macro scale the aircraft's actually done pretty nicely, it certainly looks the part. But some of the modelling, some of the finer details, are a little bit more crude than we've seen from other aircraft in the sim, and the same goes for the texturing. Unfortunately, the Aerosoft texture's a little bit more on the lower end of the resolution spectrum. As I say, from a distance the aircraft certainly looks the part, and we do get quite a few variations of the Twin Otter with the package, which is great to see. The package includes both a wheeled variant, a tundra tyre fitted variant, as well as a float plane and an amphibian version. We also have both the long-nosed and the short-nosed versions of the DHC-6. And we get a pretty decent variety and number of repaints included with the product, although again the repaints could benefit from being slightly higher resolution. The external modelling is good in terms of detail, that is to say that most of the external features have been modelled. However, in terms of modelling refinement, the product still could use a little bit of work. There are a few low poly areas, a few rough edges around the aircraft. For example, here on the engine exhaust you can see that the modelling is somewhat crude, quite jagged, the texturing as well, pretty low resolution. It's strange because that's in quite stark contrast to the panelling behind, which is actually done very nicely. The panelling detail there is very good, the rivets are all done in 3D, and overall the effect looks quite nice there with the PBR, it looks quite photorealistic. Similarly though, using the tyres as an example, you can see that they're actually quite jagged by modern standards. Again, from a distance they look absolutely fine, but coming in close they don't really hold up to Microsoft Flight Simulator standards. The Twin Otter is somewhat lacking in terms of external features versus a lot of products that we now see in the sim. I was a little bit disappointed to see there was no tablet included with the aircraft as we saw with the Aerosoft CRJ, and similarly as a result there's no option to add or remove chocks, tie downs, engine nacelle covers, things of that nature. In terms of external configuration, really all we have is the option to open up the aircraft's various doors. And you can see here we've got the nose baggage compartment open, the same for the rear baggage compartment, the passenger entrance door and the pilot's entrance door. The cockpit door and the cabin door are operated via the internal model. The baggage doors, on the other hand, are operated by switches in the cockpit. So again, the aircraft is a little bit limited in terms of external configuration. Not something that bothers me hugely personally, but if that is your cup of tea, then you might find that there's a few less options than you were hoping for. Anyway, as we're by the cabin entrance, now would be a good time to head up into the cabin, and we'll take more of a detailed look at the internal modelling and texturing of the aircraft. So coming now into the passenger cabin, overall I think a pretty decent job there from Aerosoft. It certainly ticks all of the boxes that I would be looking for in terms of cabin model. Of course, the modelling and texturing are a little bit more basic than the virtual cockpit, but I'm fine with that. I'd rather save on the FPS. And the detailing is still nice. For example, we've got the safety cards there in the seat back pockets. We've got the windows modelled fairly well. We've got the lights there across the top of the cabin. And we've also got the signs for both the no smoking and the seat belts. For me, and I'm sure for many of you, I'm generally much more interested in how the virtual cockpit of the aircraft looks. Obviously we've already seen that during our flight, but we'll head up the front and we'll just take a slightly more detailed look. We'll discuss things in a little bit more depth. So back up at the front of the Twin Otter, and again we've already seen the cockpit quite a bit throughout the flight. I do like the cockpit of the aircraft. I think it's been done very well. I would say that the cockpit is perhaps not quite up to the same standards as Aerosoft's CRJ. It does look just a touch more dated in terms of modelling and texturing. But again, overall I think it's more than adequate. It's certainly above average, and I think that Aerosoft have done a very nice job of making it feel very immersive. In terms of the Twin Otter's systems depth, again hopefully you'll have got a feel for that during the flight. We'll be taking a look at a couple more examples to demonstrate that later on. The aircraft certainly isn't study level, and although I do feel that Aerosoft were very clear about that from the start, there are a couple of omissions that I was hoping to see. Again, we will cover that more later on in the video, but overall I think the system's depth is decent enough that you can run through the normal checklist and operate the aircraft reasonably accurately. For anybody that was hoping for an in-depth Twin Otter experience, you might find yourself a little bit disappointed with the system's fidelity. But for me, the aircraft just about ticks most of my boxes in terms of what I like to see on the systems front. The gauges are all lovely and smooth in terms of operation. They're modelled very nicely as well, the texturing very crisp and clear. You can see even if we zoom right in here, everything's still very easy to read, the text still very sharp. Aircraft sounds are something we're going to touch on a little bit more again later on, but the cockpit sounds themselves I think are actually really well done. In terms of operating any controls, switches or systems, the sounds are very immersive and I really like that in an add-on. And generally speaking, quality throughout the cockpit is good. You can see even in the more hidden away areas of the virtual cockpit that the texturing and the modelling done to a pretty decent standard. You can see a little bit of weathering down on the footwell there. I think the weathering and the overall texturing and colouring in the cockpit has been done very well. It gives the aircraft quite an authentic feel. You'd certainly expect to see an aircraft of this vintage and type slightly beaten up, slightly worn. It hasn't been overdone though, and I think that Aerosoft found a really good balance on that one overall. Lastly, a quick look at the night lighting. We're not going to run through every configuration there as there's quite a few different lighting options in the cockpit. But the night lighting on the aircraft is pretty decent. Anyway, that just about covers things graphically. Just before we move on to my conclusions for the review, we're going to take a look at a couple more examples of the aircraft in terms of flight modelling and systems fidelity. So first we'll try a quick stall, see how the aircraft behaves there, and then we'll run a few of the startup systems checks. Again, to hopefully overall better demonstrate the level of systems depth on the Twin Otter. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the Twin Otter's flight model in the more extreme range of the flight envelope. As I said during the flight, overall the aircraft flies reasonably nicely. It does have some Microsoft Flight Simulator tendencies to it. But we'll put the aircraft into a stall, just see how it behaves there. So we'll come back on the yoke. Just gain a little bit more altitude here before we stall, come up to 3,000 feet. So we'll keep the power on for the time being. And coming back now on the power levers. Again, a little bit of an abrupt sound change as we bring off the power. Speed's bleeding off, just coming back through 90 knots. There's the stall warning. Aircraft wanting to drop the right wing. We've got full backstick here at the moment. The stall characteristics are fairly sedate overall, but I would expect that's probably true to life of the real Twin Otter. And basically the nose wanting to mush down, the right wing continuing to drop there. Getting a bank angle warning as well. Feels like if we keep back on the controls there, we're ultimately going to develop into a spin. We'll recover before we hit the water. Come back up on the power again. We'll just try one more, see if we can get the aircraft into a spin. Overall though, I think the stall behaviour is pretty good. Again, I imagine that the Twin Otter is a fairly benign aircraft in the stall. So we'll just get the aircraft back up to 3,000 feet. We'll try and slightly more aggressively stall the aircraft this time. So coming back on the yoke, we'll bleed off that speed again just to get the last of our altitude. We'll leave the power on. Back through 90 knots. There's the stall warning once again. All the way back on the stick. Now we're through 70 knots, this time the left wing wanting to drop. The aircraft pulling a little bit more aggressively now into the spin there with the power on. Not developing into a spin though, actually self-recovering there. And again we'll recover, back off the power. So as I said, fairly benign behaviour from the aircraft. I don't think that once again it's study level necessarily, but I think it's probably broadly representative of the Twin Otter. I don't think we'd be expecting an aircraft of this nature to be particularly aggressive, either in terms of a stall or a spin. So I said that we'd take a look at some of the more complex checklists to be run during the startup process of the Twin Otter. Obviously we skipped over those during the flight. Really just to get more of a feel for the aircraft systems, the overall fidelity of the systems modelling. Unfortunately there are certain aspects of the aircraft that aren't modelled, it's certainly not study level. So first of all we'll run an auto feather test. To do that we want the power levers set to idle, prop levers set fully forward. The auto feather is set on and we do have the select light illuminated. We'll advance the power levers up to 25 psi on the torque. So there's 25 psi, the auto feather test switch can go on. And we should now see the arm light, which you can see is not illuminated. The power lever on the left will bring back to the idle position. And we should see the prop on the left hand engine automatically go into the feather position. The arm light should go out. But as you can see, the prop doesn't actually feather, it will come back to around 40% there on the RPM. So just a quick demonstration there to show you that certain systems on the aircraft are not modelled. The aircraft, as I say, is certainly not study level. Overall, the systems in the normal range of operations are pretty good, but as with most Aerosoft aircraft, they've chosen or opted not to model any failure scenarios, it seems. On the subject of feathering, we're going to head back up into the air and we'll take a very quick look at feathering the prop once airborne. So lastly, in terms of demonstrating the aircraft, as I said, we're going to carry out an engine shutdown. We'll attempt to feather the engine just to demonstrate that. So we're back up in the cruise at 8,000 feet. We've got the cruise power set. We're going to shut down the left engine, so we'll come over to the fuel lever and we'll set that to off. You can see the engine starts to run down there, the NG rolling off. And the engine pretty much shut down. We are still showing a little bit of rotation there on the NG. Anyway, we've obviously had an engine failure, so we'll bring the prop back to the feather position. And you can see the prop does roll off. We do get some associated sounds. So far so good. And the prop disc does visibly slow down, as you can see there. Unfortunately, however, though, that seems to be about the extent of the engine shutdown process. It could be user error on my part. If it is, please let me know, but I can't seem to get the prop to actually feather and stop. That seems to be the full extent of what you can currently achieve on the aircraft using the cockpit controls. I did see on a forum that you can actually assign a button to feather the prop, but unfortunately that feathers both props at the same time, which obviously isn't of much use. And of course, ideally you'd like to be able to use the in-cockpit controls to feather the engine at any rate. So ideally that is an area that Aerosoft certainly need to fix up. Again, the aircraft isn't supposed to be study level, but I think being able to feather the props is a pretty basic functionality, and I do think we need to be able to do that on the aircraft. So there you go guys, that concludes our look at the release version of the Aerosoft DHC-6 Twin Otter. I definitely have a few things to say on this one, and I'll probably have to balance my viewpoints a little bit between my own personal preferences and also a more objective analysis of the aircraft. We'll start with my own personal opinions and we'll get those out of the way. Overall, I actually really enjoy the Twin Otter in Microsoft Flight Simulator. As I mentioned during the flight, I do think that the aircraft is pretty ideally suited to the sim, being a bit of an all-rounder. It's good fun to operate, and it really allows you to explore the vast majority of the Microsoft Flight Simulator world. Obviously the aircraft is STOL capable. We also have the amphibian variant, the tundra variant, the floatplane variant. The aircraft can cover reasonable distances, and it's fast enough to do so in a timely fashion, but also slow enough that you can appreciate the scenery as you go. Again, really there aren't too many parts of the Microsoft Flight Simulator world that you aren't going to be able to explore with the Twin Otter. And the fact that it is such a versatile aircraft means you can do all sorts of flying in it. Again, the sort of flying that personally I really enjoy. There are certainly improvements that could be made to the product, and we will cover those in just a moment's time, but for me I'm very happy with the aircraft. And whilst the product was given to me by Aerosoft on this occasion, overall I think I would be very happy with the product had I paid full price. Again though, that's my own personal preference, looking at the product in terms of things that are generally important to me. If I'm being objective and looking at it from a reviewer's point of view, there are definitely areas of the Twin Otter where I was a little bit disappointed. I was actually really impressed with the preview version of the Twin Otter. I thought that the aircraft showed a lot of promise, but I was expecting to see a little bit more work between then and now in terms of the final product. The modelling and the texturing was pretty much where I expected it to be, and again broadly on a par with the Aerosoft CRJ. Certainly it's up to a decent standard, and unless you really want to get in and close looking at the finer details, I think the aircraft looks pretty good. Systems wise, again the aircraft is broadly where I was expecting it to be. There was, I would say, a little bit of confusion surrounding the release. I think that Aerosoft were pretty clear from the get-go that the aircraft was not going to be study level. As with most Aerosoft products, systems fidelity is decent in terms of normal operation. Pretty much everything's modelled when you're running the normal checklists. In terms of systems failures and ancillary systems though, most of the detail there is pretty basic. We saw running those systems checks that the aircraft didn't really behave as it should. Even though the systems themselves were operable, it didn't seem that the actual systems functionality had been modelled. Overall I think the systems depth is decent for the price bracket, but I don't think it's going to excite too many Twin Otter enthusiasts if you're looking for a study level aircraft. The same goes for the flight model really. Overall, as I said during the flight, the aircraft is actually a real pleasure to fly. It's very easy to fly. As with most Microsoft Flight Simulator aircraft, it's very smooth on the controls, pretty stable as well once you've got it trimmed out. I very much enjoyed hand flying the aircraft, although it's perhaps lacking a little bit in terms of inertia, and as usual, very minor inputs on the controls, you can quite easily fly the aircraft. Overall though, the flight modelling did seem pretty good in terms of hitting the numbers. The aircraft certainly behaves pretty well in its stall capacity, and it seems to cruise around the right speed, climb at around the right speed. And overall it does feel as though it has the characteristics of a Twin Otter. The aircraft sounds, as ever, seem to have divided the audience. I really like them overall, but there is one big caveat to that. The cockpit sounds are excellent, as we mentioned, in terms of switches and controls. Everything done really well there, and it makes the aircraft feel very immersive. The engine sounds I really like, both internally and externally, except they can be very abrupt at times. Switching, for example, through from idle to the beta range, or coming back up to full power, there's no gradual transition there. Again, it's a very instantaneous change in sound. It's quite immersion breaking, and it doesn't really make the Twin Otter feel as polished as it probably should. Other than that though, I generally like the sounds of the aircraft, and I thought they made the Twin Otter feel pretty immersive. In summary, the Twin Otter is an aircraft that I think I'll continue to enjoy myself very much in the sim. The aircraft again is really good fun to fly, and it does broadly behave as it should. Whilst the product does have a few shortfalls currently, it is important to keep that in context with its price. The Twin Otter retailing at around $35 US. I think given the quality of the aircraft overall, and the fact that you do get that significant number of variations of the aircraft, I would say that generally speaking it's actually pretty good value for money. Again, I was given the product by Aerosoft for the purposes of this review, but had that not have been the case, I certainly still would have picked the product up, and I would have been pretty happy overall with my purchase. Anyway guys, as always, I do hope you enjoyed the review and found it to be of use. If you did, please consider giving the video a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. If you have any comments or questions for me, you can leave those down in the comment section below, and as always I'll do my best to get back to you. A huge thank you as ever to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, very much appreciated. And a big thank you very much once again to Aerosoft for letting us take a look at the Twin Otter. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.